G'day and welcome to the EV Quest podcast. Today I'm talking with Evnex CEO and founder Ed Harvey. Evnex is a New Zealand company that designs, builds and installs smart EV chargers. Hello Ed.
Hey Adrian, thanks for having me.
Hey, good. Yeah, thanks for taking the time to talk to me. Maybe to start, could you maybe just talk about how you actually started the business?
Sure.
What was your goal to be trying to achieve?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is electronics engineering. I studied electronics engineering at Canterbury University, and for my final year project I decided to convert my Honda Accord to electric, and it ended up being a little bit bigger project than I expected. But that was just something that I really enjoyed. It was probably one of the first couple of hundred EVs in New Zealand before a lot of people had a chance to drive in them. And from then on, I was pretty hooked, really. And then I worked for about 3 years as an engineer, a hardware engineer. And after that, I decided to go out and have a crack at starting a business with really no idea how to do it. And so I first, I think, why did I do it? Well, at the time, I actually just needed a charging solution for my Honda. And a lot of them on the market were, there were sort of limited options and were quite expensive. And it seemed at the time that there was, going to be a real, a strong reason for having smart charging, a charger that could adjust its output at different times of the day and integrate in with different systems and things like that. And as an engineer, that really appealed to me. So I thought I'd have a go at designing sort of a prototype based on some open source designs on the internet, and then it grew from there.
The point you made about the smart charging, so can you just talk a little bit more about that? Because that seemed really important in the promotional videos I've watched.
It's really important. Yeah, so smart charging, for us, it's all about shifting the time of charging, primarily the time or the speed of charging, to bring about benefits from both a cost perspective and electricity network perspective and a carbon impact perspective. So from a consumer point of view, if we can shift the charging to a time when the price of electricity is lower, then it means that people have a cheaper cheaper charging session. From an electricity network point of view, if we can shift the time of charging away from times when the electricity grid is typically more loaded, so early evening typically, especially cold winter nights, when people might be cooking and are using heating appliances, things like that, the grid is typically under quite a lot of load. And if we can shift charging later on into the evening, potentially even in the very early morning, that's a time when the electricity network is much less utilised, and therefore the cost to upgrade the electricity network just for that added EV load can be negated. So huge benefits there. And one of the final ones is really about carbon. And as many people will know, the grid, the emissions of the New Zealand grid, well, all grids in the world change during different times of the day, and that's because the generation mix changes. So for example, in the middle of the day, particularly in Australia, there's a lot of solar power being generated, and that's actually one of the cleaner times to charge a vehicle. Whereas in New Zealand, it's almost the complete opposite. Whereas in the evening is when in the middle of the day is probably one of the worst times to charge, because there's generally a high load, and we have this huge base hydro generation in New Zealand. So if we can shift charging around to times when hopefully heavy cold generation is not prevalent, then we can reduce the carbon emissions of charging that vehicle.
Yeah. Are we? Is New Zealand sort of okay for charging levels? So you talk about, like, there was I read you talk about increasing car numbers and everything. Have we got enough electricity?
We will need more electricity. Yeah, we will need more generation. But I think that charging smarter can give us a lot more flexibility around the types of generation that it is that we install. So there's quite a lot of solar generation being consented in New Zealand for installation over the next few years, I think particularly around sort of 2027. And the beauty about charging EVs is that they are, assuming that they are parked up at the time, they can be charged at any different time of the day, and it doesn't necessarily affect the person that's using the car. So if there are the electricity market or pricing tariffs are structured in a way where if there's a lot of solar energy in the middle of the day and the price is cheaper, then people will be incentivized to charge their vehicles in the middle of the day, whether they're fleet vehicles or if the vehicle's being left at home and things like that. So yes, we will need more generation because there's a lot of electrification happening in general with decarbonisation, a lot of process heat is going to electric, a lot of electrification of vehicles, obviously. So yes, we will need more generation, but I think a lot of that can be renewable. Basically, all of that can be renewable because of what we can do around flexing demand.
That's good. Your software and the app look pretty flash, to keep it simple. What's going on there?
So for our residential customers, they all have they can access a mobile app to control their charging and see what's happening with their charging. And particularly that can help them to see exactly how much it's costing them to charge. They can set their electricity tariffs if they're on a particular retail that's got free power, say from 9 p.m. to 12 a.m. or something like that. They can set it so that it's calculating exactly what their charging cost is. And it's really useful to be able to see actually how much is it saving to run my car. Our customers can also set up their chargers so that they integrate in with solar. So if you've got solar panels on your roof, then it actually makes a lot of sense to use that power when it's generated, as opposed to selling that power back to the grid later on for a lower price. Our chargers can actually dynamically vary the charging output to match that up perfectly with how much solar you're generating on your roof. So a lot of our customers really like looking at that and seeing that over the period of a day, their charging speed has exactly tracked the amount of power that the solar panels have been generating, and they haven't actually imported any power from the grid. And that's when you can say with confidence that at least from an electricity generation perspective, your charge is 100% from clean energy, which is really cool.
Yeah. What's a common question you get from people looking at buying a charging system? What's the sort of
a lot of people, if they're quite new to EVs, they want to know how long it's going to take to charge their car. They want to know how much it's going to charge, how much it's going to cost to charge their vehicle. And a lot of there's the sorts of information that we're kind of adding to the app as well, and adding to our website to help inform people and help make that sort of purchasing decision easier. They want to know how much it's going to cost to get it installed, and unfortunately that does vary quite a bit with different houses and depending on where you're going to put the charger and how close it's going to be to your switchboard and that type of thing. So yes, those are some of the big ones.
Yeah, and you do installations as well, is that right?
We do. Yeah, so we have pretty much complete coverage of New Zealand and can install a charger just about anywhere pretty much.
Just go back to sort of the business. I saw your website. I just came across it about, this is pretty fresh. Who are these guys? And then I was like, this is a New Zealand company. So I was like, yeah, it's pretty good. What kind of challenges or rewards have you had sort of being into the business?
Yeah.
I just went, these guys must be overseas. I just thought, that's a fresh website. But really,
thank you. No, we've put a lot of effort into our brand website on that. So, look, I think in New Zealand there's trade-offs. Capital is quite hard to come by in New Zealand. So, being able to raise money to grow an organisation like this is quite challenging, especially for manufacturing businesses. New Zealand hasn't. New Zealand investment typically is favoured towards software as a service businesses that have business models that can scale very quickly and be sort of exported at no cost as can software. For manufacturing, it is a little bit harder to obtain that capital, so that's a challenge in New Zealand. And I think certainly a much smaller market. If you don't get out of, or you don't sort of get into the export market reasonably quickly, New Zealand can be quite limited in terms of that exposure. We're not. We haven't been slow into EVs in New Zealand, but we also haven't been the fastest. And I think in some respects, some of our sort of European competitors have been able to grow really fast just because they've had exposure to that rapidly growing European EV market. But there's also a lot of good things about, being based down here in New Zealand as well. It's a really good testing market. New Zealanders are often pretty open to new technologies and things like that. And I think generally speaking, our government is reasonably supportive of innovation. We've got some really great initiatives like New Zealand Trade and Enterprise and that, which are huge support. So it's been great being able to be based out of Christchurch.
Yeah. So you are in Australia, aren't you? Yeah.
Yeah. So our head office is based in Christchurch, and we've just quite recently in the last few months launched into Australia.
Is that one state or even?
And yeah, so we do have We can probably we can install in about 50% of Australia's population at the moment, and we're aiming to have installation capability in 80% of Australia's population within the next 3 months. We've got boots on the ground in Sydney at the moment, but we are basically installing in all of the states in Australia through contractor installation relationships. So if you're based in any of the sort of top 6 or 7 cities in Australia, then we can install.
Oh, that's good. Very good. Just sort of the technology, everything's to be changing so fast. Is there sort of any new developments people should be aware of in the future? Or
vehicle to grid is one that gets talked a lot about, or vehicle to home, or vehicle to grid, or some people call it V2X. And that's just something that we're keeping an eye on. I think there's sort of quite a lot of sort of buzz around that at the moment, and that's all about obviously having your vehicle particularly at home, and being able to either run your house or discharge your battery back into the grid at times when the grid needs it. I think it's going to be a couple of years, I would say at least, before that kind of really takes off, assuming it does take off, because there's limited standardization with different vehicle manufacturers around those technologies at the moment. And the price of the hardware is still quite high, sort of around that $8,000 to $10,000 mark, although that certainly will come down. From our perspective, we are launching a new product in a couple of weeks' time, which is pretty exciting. We've just sent out a launch email today. It's on the 18th of April. I can't say too much about it at the moment, but basically it's we're launching a new charging station, and there's going to be some really cool features in there to help Kiwis and Australians reduce their charging costs, and also help to sort of automate the reduction in carbon emissions around their charging as well.
Okay, we'll watch the space then, yeah.
Absolutely. 18th of April.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, you've got a partnership with Z as well, haven't you? I saw.
We do. Yeah, we do. So again, that's a limited amount I can say about that, but we will be launching a home charging offer with Z and around sort of June and July of this year. So obviously with Z, they've got a very long history of being involved in the refueling sector, liquid fuels primarily, and for them it makes a lot of sense to start moving into the EV sector as well, both from a forecourt rapid charging perspective, but also getting into the home, because Z has about a 95% shareholding in Flick Electric, and so for them this is really such a converging space between electricity in the home, EV charging, both with fleets and rapid charging, things like that. So it makes a lot of sense for them to start building some really neat products that can provide customers sort of benefits in multiple sectors. So you might imagine a future where if you agree for your smart charging to be managed at home, so maybe your car's not charging at 5 or 6 p.m. in the evening or something like that, you may end up getting a credit or a discount on your smart charging when you use, or your fast charging when you use a Z charger on the highway or something like that. These are the types of things that we can build together when we're sort of really strong across multiple sectors.
That's interesting. Is there more growth in commercial or residential at the moment, or is it?
Probably a bit more in commercial. So a lot of, certainly a lot of government. The government's had a really clear mandate from the previous Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, about converting to electric. And so that certainly pushed a number of large government departments pretty quickly into electrifying their fleets. So we've had quite a bit of demand from that sector. I think for commercials, there's a lot of benefit in getting and dedicated chargers like we build, because it's often quite hard to charge a fleet vehicle on a 3-pin plug. For somebody that's charging their EV at home, it's often they don't mind doing that, or they might not need more charge than a 3-pin plug can offer over a sort of a 10 or 11 hour period. But with a lot of fleets, obviously you don't really want to have employees sort of hanging an extension cord out the window, for health and safety reasons and things like that as well. So a lot of fleets it makes a lot of sense, and both from a reporting perspective as well. So we can offer fleets really good insights about who's using chargers, how much energy they're using, how much it's costing, carbon impacts of charging and things like that as well. So it makes a lot of sense for fleets.
Looks good for them now as well, doesn't it, to be getting environmentally free.
It does. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Councils jumping on the bandwagon and everything. Yeah, that's good. Just like you mentioned the future, where do you see maybe the charging industry in, say, I don't know, maybe 5 years because things are moving so quickly?
Yeah, I think look, from our, I'll comment on our sector. I think I would expect to see some more incentives, particularly either regulation or financial incentives supporting smart charging. So one of the things that we feel is really important, also from a sort of a social equity perspective, is that we plan our electricity network smartly, and we plan our charging infrastructure smartly. Studies have shown that if we don't roll out smart charging right across the network, both homes and fleets, it might cost, or it's likely to cost, the average New Zealander between $200 and $300 a year extra on their electricity bill by 2050. And that's all New Zealanders, all households, not just those that have EVs. So from our perspective, we're obviously a bit biased, but from our perspective, it's a pretty important thing to get right, because it doesn't make sense to be unnecessarily building out the electricity networks when we could be, being smart about how we charge and shifting that time around. So in 4 or 5 years, I would expect there to be a lot more activity happening in that space and a lot more collaboration within the industry, both through electricity retailers, electricity distributors, and charging providers, about rolling out charging infrastructure much more smartly, particularly in homes and fleet locations.
Like more solar panels on people's roofs, that sort of thing.
Yep. I think that'll absolutely happen as well. Battery storage is certainly getting cheaper by the day, and that's going to massively affect the applicability of solar in New Zealand.
And maybe just sort of bring it all back. When you started your business, did you was it 2014? Was it?
Yes, it was. Yep, that's fine.
Did you if you're thinking about this year, sort of 10 years down the track, did you have a vision of anything like this?
That's a good question. It is almost 10 years. It's hard to believe. It's been a lot harder journey than I thought it would have. And that was probably my being a little bit naive as an engineer, sort of not far out of university. I sort of thought I would be hopefully making a decent amount of money in a couple of years' time. And it's been an incredibly challenging journey. But also, we've learned so much along the way as well. And it's just been very exciting these days, seeing it come together and growing a team. We've got about 30 people in the team now, and obviously just launching into Australia. So I think I'd be reasonably happy if I was looking back then and could see the future, although it would probably definitely a bit harder than I expected.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
That's pretty much all I had.
Awesome.
Anything else you want to sort of cover off?
Look, you can have a look at our website at evnex.com, evnex.com, if anyone's interested in taking a look. And obviously, check out our website at midday on 18th of April if you're interested in seeing our new product launch.
Yeah, that sounds great.